This is Democracy Watch. So, Mark, Donald Trump just filed his brief appealing the Colorado Supreme Court's disqualification of him on the ballot there. First off, can I get your reaction to this brief? Is there anything there that surprised you?
Yeah, I'm surprised at how weak it is on the point of whether or not he is an insurrectionist. Donald Trump portrays himself, and his lawyers like to portray him as a very confident, bold person. But when you read this brief, you have to go to page 27. By the way, the brief's only 35 pages long to get to the question of whether or not he is or is not an insurrectionist. And even then, they start by talking about how he didn't do what they did in the Civil War. Well, congratulations. you
Yeah,
didn't
quite the
fight
bar.
quite the bar. And so it's not just that I think it's politically weak, because that would be one thing, but I think, going into the US Supreme Court, you want to make every argument you can. And his lawyers make a series of off-ramp arguments about why the case shouldn't be heard, why it's too early to hear it, why Congress should decide this, not Colorado. He makes all these procedural arguments, but I do think it was a mistake on his part and his lawyer's part to bury so far back the central question of whether he's an insurrectionist, because after all, you're trying to get 5 justices to go out on a limb and basically say, we think you can still be on the ballot and it's safe for American democracy. And to bury the point about whether you're an insurrectionist that far back, I think was a tactical mistake. And it shows a lot of worry, I think, on his and his lawyer's part.
Well, do you think the lazy argument is the result of the fact that he may not be trying that hard because he might feel like this thing is in the bag anyway? I mean, there's a begrudging or cynical acceptance from most people on the left that once this thing gets to the US Supreme Court anyway, with its 6-3 composition, that they're going to rule in favor of Donald Trump being reinstated on the ballot. Do you share that belief?
Yeah, so I hate this sort of cool cynicism that has erupted on the left.
Yeah.
Hope is the tool of winners, and progressives are winners. Cynicism is the tool of despots and tyrants. And so Donald Trump wants people on the left to be cynical because it buys into this frame. And look, you and I have been doing these videos for a long time now, and we heard the same cynicism on the left about whether the US Supreme Court would rule against Black voters in Alabama, whether the Supreme Court would rule against and adopt the fringe independent state legislature theory. And in the end, the Supreme Court did the right thing in those cases. And part of it was by lawyers. In those cases, it was my team, but lawyers, and people like you, not succumbing to the cynicism, but making the Supreme Court confront the law as it is, the Constitution as it is. So I really think it's a mistake to see so many people on the left just kind of buy into the sort of too cool for school cynicism of the Supreme Court's rigged against you.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly put. Mark, do you think that this brief responding to the appealing the Colorado Supreme Court's decision to the U.S. Supreme Court is going to have any impact on the timeline? Like, what do you think we can see in terms of when we'll see a decision from the U.S. Supreme Court?
Yeah, so about the only thing that Donald Trump's lawyers and I have ever agreed on. So you should mark this if you're waiting to, you should pause or mark this video at this place. Is that this case needs to be decided. It needs to be decided quickly, and that it is a case that the Supreme Court needs to decide because it will have impact around the country. The fact is that either Donald Trump is an insurrectionist who the Constitution can hold accountable under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, or he is somehow escapes that, even though that disability applies to every other federal official, every state official, every member of Congress, and that somehow he uniquely is above the law. I don't think that's the case. I think that the Trump folks are very worried about it, but I agree with them that it's high time for the Supreme Court to decide this case once and for all.
And now, once they do make their decision one way or the other, that ruling applies to every state across the country. So if they rule that they agree with the Colorado Supreme Court that he's disqualified, that means that he is off the ballot in every state across the country. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the bad news for Donald Trump, and I think this betrays a lot of the nervousness you've seen from his team in public. His lawyer was on Fox News, and she seemed a little bit less certain about their legal arguments and more making a political argument
Right.
than might be. And that's because if he loses here, he is off the ballot everywhere. There is this idea of, or this legal doctrine of preclusion, which means you only get one bite at the apple. And if he litigates this case and he loses, he is off the ballot everywhere. Now, that's part of the reason why his legal team is arguing, well, maybe it's not the right forum to hear this case. Maybe it's too early to hear this case. So it's possible that if his legal team gets their wish and the Supreme Court sort of punts on this case and says it's too early to hear it, that it could come back up. But if he loses, he's done.
Now, on the question of the Supreme Court punting, does that kind of kick it back to the states and then put us in the situation where we're able to see scattershot rulings? So, for example, he'll be off the ballot in Colorado, he'll be off the ballot in Maine, but he'll be on the ballot in Michigan and California. Is that what we can expect to see if the Supreme Court opts not to rule on this?
No, I don't think so. I think one of the arguments he's making is that the courts as a whole should not be able to decide this. Only Congress should be able to decide this. Now, first of all, that's a near frivolous argument because there is nothing in the 14th Section 3 of the 14th Amendment that says Congress gets to decide this.
Right. He's basically he's picking the only unique branch of government where Republicans control and deciding that for apropos of nothing, that those are the people who should decide this issue.
Correct. And again, this gets to my point about, I've argued and won 4 cases in the US Supreme Court. And one of the things you want to do is you want to go into the court with a sense of confidence that the court will rule your way. Sure, you want to make all the arguments you can make, but you want to go in with a sense of confidence. He has bragged over and over again how he appointed 3 of the justices on this Supreme Court. This is a 6-3 conservative court. And the fact that he is going in and saying, no, it's not you. It's actually, Mike Johnson in Congress
right.
who should be doing this. Like I said, to me is a mistake in terms of the betraying a real nervousness that he might lose this.
Well, it seems like the marching orders have gone out on the right because they're all repeating in unison this talking point that any attempt to disqualify Donald Trump from the ballot in response to the plain text of the Constitution is election interference. Can I have your response to this talking point?
I mean, could you imagine a dumber argument? I mean, the Trump folks specialize in dumb arguments. They hire lawyers to make preposterously dumb arguments. But this takes the cake. This could be as dumb as some of the stuff we saw Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell peddle in 2020. How could it be election interference to apply the US Constitution? I mean, it's the Constitution.
Yeah. Well, what is the broader danger of the US Supreme Court overturning the Colorado Supreme Court's disqualification here?
I think we are in a very, very perilous time in our nation's history. We have 2 cases that are weaving their ways to the US Supreme Court, this case and the immunity case. And in both cases, the Supreme Court has to wrestle with whether or not there is a line that can be crossed by the president for which there are consequences. If the US Supreme Court says there is no line that can be crossed by the president and still have there be consequences, that will have profound consequences for the future. I mean, it means that presidents can commit open, flagrant crimes. I read someone joked, does this mean that Joe Biden could kidnap Donald Trump and have him held hostage?
Yeah.
And he can't be criminally prosecuted. He can't be judged there's just no consequences. So what Donald Trump is arguing for in this case, like the immunity case, is lawlessness. It is for allowing a president to do anything, in this case, to incite a violent insurrection, to give aid and comfort to people who are trying to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. And look, Brian, we fought a civil war over this. The Congress and the states after the Civil War purposely, intentionally put this provision in the Constitution to prevent another situation in which a demagogue like Donald Trump threatens the fate of our country and our constitutional order. And if the Supreme Court says that's too old, that's too novel, that doesn't apply anymore, just imagine what we will see out of Donald Trump in the future.
Yeah. Well, we'll leave it there. Obviously, when we have any update in terms of what we can expect to see from the U.S. Supreme Court finally ruling on this decision, you can catch that here or on Democracy Docket, which is the free news outlet Marc founded to focus on everything voting and elections. I'll put the link to that outlet right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. So if you haven't yet signed up for Democracy Docket, please sign up. It's a great outlet. It's what I use on a daily basis. With that said, I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.